For my granddaughter's 9th birthday, I bought her a little GPS watch as a gift. She loved it immediately. Then she pressed the button from my brother's house. "Grandpa, something's wrong." I drove faster than I had in 20 years. The recording destroyed him. On my granddaughter's 9th birthday, my brother handed her a small wrapped box with a bow on top. Emma tore into it with both hands, the way 9-year-olds do. She lifted out a children's smartwatch, pink, shiny, brand new. She squealed. Then she tilted it toward me, face scrunching. "Grandpa, why does it feel warm if I just took it out of the box?" I smiled and told her, "Batteries do that sometimes." But my brother Gary looked away too quickly. I noticed I just didn't understand yet what I was looking at. 3 weeks later, I did. And the moment I understood, I stopped being a patient man. I want you to know something before I tell you the rest. My wife Margaret and I have been married 41 years. We built our life on 12 acres of farmland outside Cookeville, Tennessee. We raised one son, Jason, who grew up strong and decent and joined the Army at 22. We have one granddaughter, Emma, who lives with us while Jason is deployed overseas. Has been for 14 months. Margaret and I are not frail. We are not confused. We are not declining. We are 65 and 63 years old, and we still run this property, manage our finances, plant a garden every spring, and beat every neighbor on our road at the church trivia night. But apparently to my brother Gary, we were worth more as a problem to be solved than as people to be loved. Gary is 58. He married Susan 14 years ago. Susan has a brother named Phil Mercer who calls himself a financial advisor, but whose actual talent, I would learn, is identifying elderly property owners with assets and insufficient suspicion. Phil had done this before. Not to strangers, to family, friends, to a woman in his own church. He was smooth enough that nobody had ever pinned it on him legally. Gary found in Phil not just a brother-in-law, but a business partner. All they needed was the right target. We were the right target. It started 8 months ago when Gary began calling more than usual. Not catching up calls, check-in calls. "How are you feeling? Getting enough sleep?" Margaret mentioned her knee had been bothering her. And Gary seized on that for 3 separate conversations. He started coming by on Saturdays, bringing Susan, helping with things we hadn't asked for help with. He reorganized my tool shed without asking. He told Margaret she shouldn't be carrying laundry down the stairs alone. Small comments, gentle ones, carefully placed. I chalked it up to family. He was getting older, too. Maybe something had shifted in him. Then Phil came to dinner. Gary brought him one Sunday in early April, introduced him as someone who'd help them with their retirement portfolio. Very casual, we ate Margaret's pot roast, and Phil asked thoughtful questions about the farm, about Jason's deployment timeline, about what our long-term plan was for the property. He had a way of listening that made you feel heard. I told him we planned to leave the farm to Jason. He nodded slowly. "That's admirable," he said. "You'd be surprised how many families don't plan ahead." He left his card on the table when they left. Margaret picked it up. "He seems nice." I said nothing. Something about Phil Mercer sat wrong with me. Something in the way his questions had an order to them like he'd asked them before. Over the following weeks, Gary escalated his helpfulness. He set up what he called a smart home system. A hub device in the kitchen, a small speaker unit in the living room, another in my study. "It'll make things easier," he said. "You can ask it the weather, set reminders, play music." He spent an afternoon linking everything to an app on his phone, claiming it was for remote tech support if we ever had trouble. I'm not a tech person. I didn't think to ask the right questions. Emma was the one who noticed. She came downstairs one morning before school, still in her pajamas, and stopped in the kitchen doorway, staring at the hub device on the counter. "Grandpa," she said. "Why is the little light blinking? Nobody's talking to it." I looked. She was right. A faint amber pulse. I told her it was probably just updating. But Emma had that look kids get when they know something is off and don't have the words yet. She moved around the device in a wide arc to pour her cereal. 9 years old and already giving it a wide berth. I looked at that light for a long time after she left for school. Then I called my neighbor Tom Waverly, who retired from telecommunications and understands these things. He came over with a small device of his own and swept the kitchen in under 10 minutes. When he looked up, his expression had changed. "Robert," he said carefully. "This unit isn't just a smart speaker. It's transmitting audio continuously, not to a manufacturer's server." He read me the address, a private account registered when I searched it that evening to a Gary Dale Hutchkins. My brother, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Margaret had gone to bed. Emma was asleep. The house was quiet except for the sound of that device, which I had not yet unplugged. I didn't unplug it. A man who gathers evidence doesn't warn the people watching him. I thought about the past 3 months in a different light. The calls about Margaret's knee, the questions about Jason's deployment date, the casual dinner with Phil, the way Gary had wired every common room. I thought about what we had. 12 acres purchased in 1987, now appraised at just under $400,000. Savings of $92,000. A small investment account Jason had helped us set up. Another $40,000, $500,000, give or take. Enough for a man like Phil Mercer to find interesting. Enough for a brother like Gary to find worth taking. The next morning, I called an elder law attorney named Patricia Holloway. Her name had appeared twice in a Cookeville Legal Journal article about guardianship fraud cases in rural Tennessee counties. She answered her own phone that told me she took her work seriously. We met Thursday. I brought Tom's scan report, the device registration documents I'd printed, and a timeline I'd written in my notebook. Patricia Holloway is 61, small-framed with the kind of precise attention that makes you feel like she's cataloging everything you say. She read through my notes without interrupting. Then she asked 3 questions. How long had Gary been increasing contact? Had anyone suggested we might need extra support soon? And had we recently met anyone new through Gary who asked about our finances? I answered yes to all 3. She folded her hands. Mr. Hutchkins, what you're describing follows a very specific pattern. It's called a guardianship pipeline. Someone positions themselves as a concerned family member, documents behavior that appears to indicate cognitive decline, introduces a financial professional, and initiates a guardianship petition. The goal is legal control of assets before the target understands what's happening. She paused. You caught this early. That matters, but we need to move carefully. If they realize, they'll accelerate. She told me not to remove the devices, to behave normally, to document everything. She pulled up court records on her laptop and searched for 20 minutes while I sat across from her. Then she turned the screen toward me. A guardianship petition had been filed 11 days ago in Putnam County Probate Court. Petitioner Gary Dale Hutchkins, supporting affidavit signed by Philip R. Mercer, identified as a concerned family associate with first-hand knowledge of Mr. Hutchkins's declining cognitive state. Proposed guardian of estate. Philip R. Mercer, not Gary. Phil. Patricia had seen this before, too. Gary gets a cut, she said simply. Phil gets control and takes a management fee off every asset liquidation. Your brother trades you for a percentage. She kept her voice professional, but her jaw was tight. The hearing is in 19 days. I drove home with my hand steady on the wheel. Inside, I was something colder than angry. I was certain. That Friday, Gary called to invite Emma to spend Saturday at his house. Susan would take her to the mall, he said. Get her some new school shoes. I hesitated. Emma looked up at me from the couch with those wide eyes that still trusted everyone. I said, yes. I had a reason. I'd ordered a child GPS tracker watch the day before Patricia told me to, a simple one. I told Emma it was so she could always reach me when she was away. She liked the idea. I buckled it onto her wrist Saturday morning before Gary's car pulled in, showed her the red button, and told her anytime she felt uncomfortable or wanted to come home, press it and I would come. No questions, no waiting. She pressed it once in the driveway just to test it. My phone buzzed instantly. She grinned. Got it, Grandpa. They left at 10 o'clock. By noon, I was restless. I called Margaret into the kitchen, away from the speaker devices, and told her everything, all of it. Her face went through several stages, disbelief, pain, then something I recognized as the quiet fury of a woman who has spent 41 years building something and will not watch it be dismantled. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand hard. What do we need to do? I told her. She nodded. We got to work. We spent the afternoon sorting through the past 8 months with fresh eyes. Margaret found 3 separate conversations she'd had with Gary where she mentioned feeling tired, forgetting to take her vitamin, losing her reading glasses. Small things. Gary had written them down. She found his handwriting on a notepad he'd left on the kitchen counter months ago. A list. Her knee. My truck's check engine light I hadn't addressed immediately. The time I misplaced my wallet. A grocery trip where I'd reportedly bought the wrong milk. A list of ordinary human moments reframed as symptoms. We photographed every page. At 3:47 that afternoon, my phone buzzed. Not a call. The GPS alert. Emma's location. Not Gary's house. Not the mall. A residential address on the east side of Cookeville I didn't recognize. I was in my truck in under 2 minutes. I called Patricia from the road. She told me to call the non-emergency police line, explain the situation, and request a welfare check. She gave me the case number from the guardianship filing to reference. The dispatcher's tone changed when I mentioned it. Officers were dispatched. The address was a neat colonial house on Burwood Court. A patrol car arrived the same moment I did. Officer Dana Flores, late 30s, professional, I explained quickly. She nodded and led the way to the door. Gary answered. His smile when he saw me lasted exactly 1 second before something shifted behind his eyes. Susan appeared behind him and then Emma pushed past both of them and ran straight to me, wrapping both arms around my waist, saying nothing, just holding on. When I looked down at her, her eyes were red. Officer Flores spoke with Emma in the patrol car while I stood on the porch with Gary. He tried explanations. The mall had been too crowded. He said Susan's friend had offered to host a little gathering for Emma instead. He gestured vaguely at the house. I said nothing. I had learned from Patricia. Let them talk. When Officer Flores came back, she was professional. Emma's okay, she said, but she told me some things I need to follow up on. She said the adults here spend a lot of time asking her questions about her grandparents, whether you forget things, whether grandma ever gets confused driving, whether she's ever had to remind you to eat. She looked at me. She also told me she didn't feel like she could say no. Gary started to protest. Flores raised one hand. Sir, I'll need your statement. I took Emma home. She fell asleep in the passenger seat before we reached the highway. Her small face turned toward the window, the GPS watch still buckled on her wrist. I watched the road and thought about what I still needed to do. Back home, I synced Emma's tracker to my laptop. The device had logged her location every 30 seconds since she left. And like the watch in the story that taught me what to look for, I had enabled the audio backup feature. The watch had been recording ambient sound since that morning. I put on headphones and opened the files. The first hour was ordinary car conversation, music, a fast food drive-thru. The second hour was not. Gary's voice clear and close. Emma, we want to talk to you about your grandpa for a minute. You love him, right, Emma? Yes, Susan. Of course you do. And that's exactly why we need your help. Grandpa is getting older. Sometimes older people need more care than their families realize. Emma quietly. Grandpa's fine, Gary. Well, sweetheart, sometimes when we love someone, we don't see the signs. Has he ever forgotten to pick you up from school? Emma. No, Gary. What about forgetting what day it is or losing things around the house? Emma, everybody loses things. Susan, her voice cooling slightly. Emma, this is important. If the right people don't know that Grandpa needs help, something could happen to him. You don't want something to happen to him, do you? Silence, Gary. When someone asks you a social worker or a doctor, you can just say that Grandpa seems more forgetful lately. That's all. Just that one little thing, and it helps us help him, Emma. But it's not true, Susan. Sharper. Emma. Long pause. Then Emma's voice, very small. Can I call my grandpa now? Gary. In a little while. Let's just practice one more time. I stopped the recording. I sat in the dark of my study for a moment with my hands flat on the desk. Then I called Patricia Holloway at home. She answered on the second ring. I told her what I had. She said, send me the files tonight. And Robert, get some sleep if you can. We have 12 days and we're going to use every one of them. Margaret was waiting in the hallway outside my study. I didn't have to tell her much. She'd heard enough through the door. She sat down on the little bench by the window and looked at the floor for a moment. When she looked up, her eyes were clear. Gary's been at our table every Easter for 30 years, she said, not angry. Just naming a fact before she set it down for good. Okay, what do we do next? We did 3 things. We filed a police report the following morning detailing the surveillance devices, the off-site GPS data, and the coached questioning of a minor. Officer Flores had already filed her own report from the welfare check. The detective assigned to us, Mike Conroll, was the kind of man who asked good questions and wrote everything down. We called Jason. That was the hardest phone call of my life. 14 months deployed, and I had to tell my son that while he was serving overseas, his uncle had been constructing a legal case to seize the farm his family had worked for 4 decades. The line was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then Jason's voice came through steadier than I expected. Dad, tell me what you need from me. I told him we needed a character statement from him and his commanding officer, attesting to his awareness and management of family affairs from abroad. He filed both within 48 hours. We built the case. Patricia worked methodically. She pulled Phil Mercer's professional history and found 3 prior clients, all elderly rural property owners, all of whom had experienced sudden guardianship petitions within months of meeting Phil through a mutual contact. One case, an 81-year-old widow in Crossville, had resulted in the sale of her family's 60-acre farm within 90 days of placement in a memory care facility. Adult Protective Services had investigated. Nothing had been proven. The widow died 14 months after placement. Her estate had been fully liquidated. The pattern was clear. The bodies were there. We just needed to be the case that finally made it stick. The hearing was on a Thursday. Patricia had requested an expedited date given the active police investigation. Judge Howard Brackett presided, 68 years old, 31 years on the Tennessee bench. The kind of judge who has heard every version of every lie and whose patience for wasted time is measurable in seconds. Gary and Susan sat at the petitioner's table with their attorney, a Nashville man named Clifford Bates, who wore a suit that cost more than our hay baler. Phil Mercer sat in the gallery looking composed. His kind always does. Clifford Bates opened with a performance. Concerned family, aging couple, isolated rural property, declining cognitive indicators, Margaret's knee, my truck's check engine light, the grocery trip. He had affidavit from 2 of Gary's friends who described interactions with me that I barely recognized. He spoke about Emma living with us as a burden rather than a joy. He proposed Phil Mercer as a state guardian with Gary as residential guardian. He called it compassionate intervention. Patricia stood. She called Tom Waverly first. He described the audio surveillance device Gary had installed, the continuous transmission to Gary's private account, and the duration of unauthorized recording. He showed the court a printed registry of transmitted files dating back 11 weeks. The gallery stirred. Judge Brackett made a note. Patricia entered the GPS data log from Emma's watch as Exhibit B, demonstrating that Emma had been taken to an unlisted address without my knowledge and contrary to the stated plan. She entered Officer Flores's report as Exhibit C, then she nodded to the bailiff. The courtroom audio system came on. Emma's voice filled the wood-paneled room. "Can I call my grandpa now?" Silence throughout the gallery. Judge Brackett set down his pen. Gary's attorney glanced at his client. Gary was looking at the table. "In a little while, let's just practice one more time." Susan's voice. Gary's voice. Emma crying. Barely audible. Emma finally breaking. "But it's not true." The recording ran 4 minutes and 20 seconds. It felt much longer. When it ended, the room held its silence for a moment before anyone moved. Someone in the gallery exhaled audibly. A woman near the back said something quiet to the person beside her. Judge Brackett looked at Gary Hutchkins for a long flat moment. Patricia called Margaret. My wife of 41 years walked to the stand in her church cardigan and answered every question in clear, complete sentences. She described managing the farm's accounts. She described her active involvement in every financial decision we had made in the past decade. She described Emma's school schedule, her appointments, her friendships. She described her own medical history accurately and without prompting, including the knee issue that Gary had cited as evidence of decline. "It's bursitis," she said calmly. "I've had it 12 years. I manage it fine." Patricia called our accountant of 18 years, Ed Pruitt. He testified that our finances were managed competently and consistently, that there were no signs of confusion or mismanagement, and that he had never had cause for concern in nearly 2 decades of working with us. She called Detective Control, who presented the active criminal investigation into unauthorized audio surveillance under Tennessee state law. Then she called Gary. Gary came to the stand looking smaller than he ever had at our kitchen table. Patricia asked him to explain the purpose of the device he'd installed. He said it was for convenience. She asked him to explain why it was transmitting to his private account. He said he thought it was the manufacturer's standard setup. She showed him the registration documents, his name, his personal email. He looked at them and said nothing. She played one more audio clip. Gary's own voice captured by the device in our kitchen 3 weeks before the birthday. Speaking to Phil Mercer on a call that neither of them had known was being logged. The petitions filed. Once the hearing goes through, how fast can you move on the land sale? The farm's the real asset. Phil's voice. 60 days if the title's clean. We split the advisory fee the way we discussed. The courtroom erupted. Judge Brackett's gavel cracked twice. Clifford Bates stood. "Your Honor, I move to sit down, Mr. Bates." Brackett's voice did not rise. It didn't need to. He removed his glasses and looked at Gary Hutchkins for a long moment. Then he looked at Phil Mercer in the gallery. Phil was no longer composed. Judge Brackett ruled the guardianship petition was denied in its entirety. Robert and Margaret Hutchkins had demonstrated full competency and there was no basis for intervention. He referred the matter to the Putnam County District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution on charges including unauthorized surveillance, conspiracy to commit financial fraud against a protected adult, and child manipulation. He referred Phil Mercer's conduct to the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance for investigation and license revocation. He issued a no-contact order between Gary and Susan Hutchkins and our family, including Emma, effective immediately. His final words from the bench: "This court has seen elder abuse in many forms. What makes this case particularly egregious is the use of a child. A 9-year-old girl was coached to bear false witness against her own grandparents. This court will not overlook that. The district attorney's office will have every document filed in this proceeding." Outside the courthouse, Patricia shook my hand. Margaret stood beside me in the afternoon light. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. 4 months later, Gary Hutchkins was indicted on 2 felony counts, unlawful surveillance, and conspiracy to commit financial exploitation of an elderly adult. He pled not guilty. His trial date is set. Philip Mercer surrendered his financial advisor license under investigation by state regulators. 3 of his former clients' families have come forward. A civil suit is being prepared. Clifford Bates, the Nashville attorney, filed a motion to withdraw from Gary's representation 2 weeks after the hearing. The no-contact order stands permanent pending resolution of criminal proceedings. Jason came home on emergency family leave 3 weeks after the hearing. He sat with Emma in the backyard for a long time. The 2 of them in the garden chairs Margaret keeps near the tomatoes. I watched from the kitchen window. I didn't need to hear the conversation. I knew what it looked like when somebody who'd been scared finally felt safe again. Emma still wears the GPS watch sometimes. Not because we make her, because she says she likes knowing the red button is there. I think about what would have happened if she hadn't noticed the blinking light that morning. If she hadn't asked the question out loud, if I had been a different kind of man, one who takes comfort in assuming the best, who trusts because trusting is easier. Gary had counted on that. He'd known me for 58 years, and he believed I would not look too closely, that I would chalk up unease to getting older, that I would be too proud or too embarrassed to call a lawyer over a suspicion. He was wrong about who I'd become. I spent my life building with my hands, framing walls, setting foundations, learning that the integrity of a structure comes from what's underneath, not what's visible on the surface. A family is no different. Gary looked at ours and saw a transaction. I looked at the same thing and saw what Margaret and I had spent 4 decades making real. The land, the house, Emma, sleeping safely in the room down the hall. Some things are worth going exactly as far as it takes. Margaret and I had dinner on the porch last Saturday, the way we do in summer when the light holds late. Emma did her homework at the table behind us, occasionally reading sentences aloud to check them. The dogs were sprawled on the steps. The tomatoes were coming in strong. "You think he ever understood?" Margaret said, "what he was actually taking?" I thought about it honestly. "No," I said, "I think he saw numbers." She nodded slowly, picked up her glass. "Then that's the real loss, not ours." We sat there until the fireflies came out. Emma finished her homework and pulled her chair between ours without being asked, the way she does. And we watched the field go dark together, the 3 of us. Exactly as we should be.